Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Coaching Outdoors podcast. Today, we are joined by the wonderful Anna Brown. So I will hand over to Anna to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi there, lovely to join you. I'm Anna Brown, so I'm a coach and a coach supervisor based in northwest Hertfordshire, about 30 miles from London, in the beautiful Chiltern Hills.
Beautiful. And yeah, great to meet you. And kickstarting our conversations with a question that we ask all our guests. It is, what is your earliest memory of being outdoors? And then why do you enjoy the outdoors so much?
I love that question. Do you know, it's not a question that I'd thought about too deeply, so it's really nice to sort of go there. Do you know, my background's a little bit of a clue to this. The bamboo, I was brought up, so from the age of 18 months, we moved overseas, went to Switzerland, Japan, then Hong Kong. And I returned at the age of 19 to go and do my bachelor's. And I think my earliest memory is when we lived in Japan, I had a beautiful bedroom that it was like a sunroom, but on the second floor, and glass on all three sides of the wall. And right outside the window was an absolutely huge tree. And I don't know if any of the listeners or any of you guys have read The Folk from the Faraway Tree.
Yeah.
It was one of my favourite books as a child, where all of these different creatures and all of these different people lived in different levels of the tree. And then if you went to the very top of the tree, then you could go to a different world. And for me, there was this thing of, look, I was like I was in a tree house. And actually one time, this monkey got away from, they usually lived in the sort of temple grounds, quite a bit further away from where we lived, actually. But there was a monkey in the tree one time. So there was always a sort of sense of wonder, I guess, and imagination and, really sort of looking at the detail of things. And I think one of the things with coming back to the UK each summer and being wherever we were overseas is you really notice the differences between things, the quality of the green, the sort of how the bugs are similar but different, or the birds. And I think I've always had a real sort of fascination with things. And I think I'm a relatively quiet child, so I was quite happy in my own world, sort of arranging shells that I picked up on the beach around my bedroom for hours. So, yeah, I think that's probably it.
I love that. Oh my God, the memory of The Folk of the Faraway Tree. I haven't thought about that book for a long time, but I was absolutely obsessed with that book when I was little. For the same reason, I used to climb trees all the time when I was a child. I scared the living daylights out of my parents on a daily basis. But I wanted to always go up into a tree because I wanted to find the folk from the faraway tree and get as high up into trees as possible to be able to find another world. So that's just opened up a huge memory for me. Thank you. And I tell you what, we get so many different stories. Obviously, everybody has their first experience or their first memory of being outdoors. And we haven't had monkeys yet. We've had gorillas in the mist, but we haven't had monkeys yet. So I think that's wonderful. And again, it's the nature of where you are, isn't it? So if you're in England, you're not likely to spot a monkey up a tree unless it's got out. But you're absolutely right. So some of the nature is very similar and some of it is actually very different. And just being able to experience that, which a lot of people probably don't have the opportunity to go over there, especially at such a young age. It's such a wonderful memory. And kind of bringing it a bit closer to home now, what's your kind of backstory in terms of how did you become a coach in terms of your outdoor coaching? So what kind of put those two things together, your coaching practice and being and doing that practice in the outdoors?
I think I probably ebbed and flowed, I think it's true to say, in my connection with nature over the course of my career. Not necessarily as a coach, but prior to being a coach, I was a leader and worked in various charities and academic institutions. And I think it was in the background a lot more for me. So one of my roles, I worked at Ashridge as one of the roles was as a hospitality director looking after the hotel facilities. Actually, it was in a neo-Gothic castle set in beautiful estate, formal gardens, Huntbury, Repton, beautiful little designed gardens, as well as Capability Brown, and vast woodland. And I think one of the things that for me made quite a difference to the experience our clients were getting in their learning experience there at Ashridge while they were coming for management development programs, and then myself actually when I was doing my MBA there, is you'd go outside and sit in the gardens or wander through the woods because you wanted to sort of percolate and mull over what it was that you were learning. When I left and went to Henley, I think there's something about Henley, studying at Henley, that isn't just about the quality of the learning that you get, it's that setting by the river where, it's just so tranquil and peaceful, and just everyone gets drawn outside, don't they, in the breaks. And so I think bringing it into my coaching practice actually was quite a practical thing to begin with. Because when you're starting out, actually, you're not earning a huge amount. You're not necessarily charging your clients a high amount, or don't wish to charge your clients too much. And so booking meeting rooms is quite expensive unless you happen to have a home office of some sort. And going to their office, I found, actually, they're just not concentrating often on, what they need to grow and develop, because they're distracted by a colleague who's walked past the glass room that they've booked. And so actually I started to say, look, let's go and walk around the parks in London, or let's meet locally and walk around the forest at Ashridge, or there's a beautiful lake near us. And I really started to notice what a difference it made, not just to me in terms of my presence as a coach, but how quickly clients were able to open up and feel safe and feel stimulated actually by the environment. So it was a gradual process, but I think there's also been something, I think it starts with you as a coach, and I've been, I suppose, on a bit of a journey alongside my development as a coach of sort of rewilding myself, for want of a better word. Spending much more time outside. My garden is my haven. I love it. And so it's when you start to notice things yourself, you then can start bringing them into your work much more deeply. And actually, my first degree is in environmental science. So it's actually a sort of full circle almost. So I'd sort of left that behind, and it had perhaps, been a feature in some things occasionally, but I feel like I've come back to that root really.
And it is this whole within our life, when we ask this question about earliest memory and childhood and being outdoors, and a lot of times guests that we speak to spend a lot of time outside as a child, and then almost as we kind of grow up and move through the education system and get a career, we kind of become trapped within four walls. For me, I took an alternate option, decided to join the army, which was potentially a little bit extreme, but it meant that I was outdoors. And then, yes, this rewilding process is we just almost have this realization, and for you, it sounds, slightly too circumstance, though actually once you were in that position, it then enabled you to kind of have this awareness and really kind of come back into connection with nature, and how that then supported your clients as well. And kind of getting a little bit more specific and diving into your practice, your coaching practice even more. I understand that it's very much influenced by the systems approach. It would just be really interesting to have, a top level explanation of, what this is, so our listeners just have a bit of an insight, and then linking into nature and how that is then integrated for you and for your clients, and what do they notice and what do they experience?
Yeah, well, the systems approach, put simply, is really sort of thinking about how everything is interrelated and interdependent. And there's also something, I think, I studied for my coach supervision qualification at the Tavistock Institute and work with the system psychodynamic approach. So that's also bringing in the unconscious. So what's going on under the surface? So what's, what are the linkages all the way between things? How are things related? And actually what's going on under the surface? And I think that's always been part of me. I've always been, I don't think I've ever let go of that childhood, but why question. And I've always wanted to sort of go deeper to understand what's going on. And one of the things I really notice with clients, when you're outside, there is so much available to you. It always felt to me quite clunky indoors to bring some approach to clients. It was like I was sort of whipping out a toolkit that didn't feel connected to that, what we happened across. And I have a lovely example of, there's a place called Tring Park near where I live. Beautiful sort of landscape with, woodland and then open areas with little copses of trees. And I was with a client and I came across a circle of trees, deliberately planted, but very old circle of about 8 trees. And but so tall, and almost you wouldn't have noticed from a distance that they were individual trees. It looked like one tree. And there was a client that I was talking to. Actually, it was a supervision client, so it was a coach who was really struggling with a particular client she was working with, of getting sucked into what the client was. So the client was getting sucked into all their relationships. She was getting sucked in. And so there needed to be some sort of way of making sense of what was going on. And so I stood her in the middle of this circle of trees. And I said, so use these trees. Let's think about who they are in this scenario you're describing. And she went up and met each of these trees and, described them as a particular person in this drama that was unfolding. And I then at the end said to her, well, where are you in this circle? And she said, oh, I'm this tree over here. And so I invited her to think about, as a coach, actually, where was she best serving her client? What position was she being the most help? And so she moved herself into the center where she saw her client standing. And she said, I want to stand here over his shoulder and support him. And I think walking away with that memory, it's not easy to forget something as majestic. There's also things, we were able to do that going deeper into it. So, as I said at the beginning, you've got what looks like one tree from a distance, but it's actually multiple trees. And then you're inside and you're thinking, okay, well, there's just trees here, but actually, how are they communicating under the soil? And, I know in some of your previous podcasts, people have mentioned the network of fungal communication, and The Hidden Life of Trees. Love that book. And we started talking about, well, actually, what was going on underneath? And it just made such a big shift. And I don't think that would have happened had we been indoors.
It's really great to kind of bring the systems approach alive in the outdoors, as you said, helping people to really understand that they are part of so many systems, and so many systems are interrelated. And the outdoors and nature really does stand as a great metaphor for that, because it's almost like we can understand it in nature. The trees feed from the soil, the soil is made from decomposed trees, and people can kind of see that system in nature, but don't necessarily place themselves in it often enough, or don't necessarily realize that they are part of that system as well. So I think being able to, like you said, invite people to interact with it and be part of it and place themselves within it as well, and shift their move, shift their place within it. it just opens the brain to so many different ways of thinking, and different perspectives. And like you said, just a memory as well, just that client you had will just always remember those trees and how they put themselves. So if they find themselves moving into a different position again, they can bring themselves back, even if they're not in that copse of trees again. I think it's such a lovely way to experience metaphor, and mimicry and mirroring and those sorts of things. Your practice is also informed by adult learning theory as well, and it would be great again if you could share just a little bit of the, what is adult learning theory, so that our listeners can get a kind of a basic understanding of that, and how you kind of again share some examples, if you can, of how you integrate that adult learning theory whilst you're outdoors in nature, and what nature can do to help support adult learning theory within your practice.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, the vertical development is adult development theory is also known as vertical development, and it's sort of it's different from what's known as horizontal development, the sort of more conventional way of learning, which is, where you apply energy. So the students I work with at Warwick doing their MBAs, for example, and knowing exactly what this feels, they're just absolutely throwing themselves into learning new subjects, new information that they haven't yet acquired. Sort of learning to drive, frankly, is also on that sort of horizontal development way of making sense of the world. I think there's something different about vertical development or adult development, where it's actually about expanding and deepening your understanding of yourself and how you interact with the world around you. So that's in context, but in relationship as well. And so it's actually, for me, it's sort of like almost the other side of the coin, or a partner with the systems approach, in that it's actually thinking about what's happening here with me. How am I responding to the environment I'm in? Actually, is it conducive to my enrichment? How am I responding to particular kind of people? And also, I really noticed this a lot, particularly in recent times of the pandemic, is people are so stressed and so sort of overwhelmed, and the burnout, and what a difference it's made for them to get outside. And actually the opportunity, as much as there's been real negatives around some of the, the working from home and the isolation, has been that reconnection with nature. Adult development theory really brings it home for me when I'm starting to think about descriptions that I'm using. So I may be working with somebody remotely who's based in Moscow, or, you can still bring nature in. So there's one metaphor I often use, and particularly, as I said, with the MBAs at Warwick, where they are doing full-time jobs, often very demanding jobs. They're studying also part-time at master's level, so that's not an easy thing to do anyway. And they've often got families as well. And they're human beings, so they, respond to the challenges of the world. And so when they come into the session that I'm having with them, a coaching session, it gives them some peace and some reflective space that they need. So rather than channeling, as I call it, the rushing river part of themselves, where they are absolutely charging along like crazy things, they're not noticing what's going along, the detail, the nuance, because they're just trying to get stuff done. And I always think, if you think about rivers and how many of them were straightened by us, by humans, through cities. Trees were removed. And so what happens when there's a big downpour? There's an absolute deluge that happens, and then there's usually a flood that happens downstream. But actually the more natural way for a river to behave is a meandering stream, to make its way backwards and forwards, have moments of stillness and circling round, moments of speed. And I think and actually the richness of the flora and fauna that form around those sort of meandering rivers is incredible as well. So I invite them to think about that, what are they channeling right now? And so when they are in their rushing river part, which has got them to where they are today, so there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not, when overused, it's not helpful to them. So I get them to channel their sort of meandering stream and think about actually how do they ensure that they have those moments of reflective space so that they can really, beyond the coaching engagement, to really sort of allow some of what they're experiencing to sink in and to think more strategically, think beyond what they're doing right then, just trying to get that deadline or just trying to meet that target.
It can be so hard when you're in that river and you feel as if you're being swept along, and it's very much your world has shrunk down just to, I don't know, trying to keep your head up above the water and bobbing along. And it's just hearing you talk, it's for me, it kind of reminds me of that kind of, the quote about the journey, not the destination, as opposed to constantly striving to reach the destination as fast as possible. It's all about kind of bringing it back to the now and pausing and centering and grounding. And just hearing you talk about, what we've been through in the pandemic, and the stress word is almost a bit of a default answer to some of the clients that I have. How are you feeling? Stressed. Okay. Stressed isn't exactly an emotive word. How can we unpack it? And this is almost, it brings us on really quite nicely to the next concept that would be really insightful just to unpack a little bit around slipstreaming. And it seems to me it's about bringing it back to nurturing yourself, so that it's not just about yourself. You're then able to kind of support others. So yeah, please tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, I just love that concept. So slipstreaming is, of course, you see it on the Olympics, where you've got the sort of cyclists or the runners, how they sort of go in packs, don't they? Because the one at the front is pulling along in their sort of energy, the ones behind them. And and that sort of, they're actually operating as a group, aren't they, really? And I think the concept is just so interesting from a developmental perspective, because actually as coaches, we are the instrument of our work. And so if it doesn't start with us, how can we really bring the fullest value to our clients? So we have to experience all of what we're trying to bring to them first. And we can't really talk about it, I don't think anyway, unless we really sort of truly embrace it. And I was, there's this beautiful lake I was mentioning, College Lake in Tring, is actually, it's a scar in the landscape. It is a former chalk quarry used to make cement, but it was given over to the wildlife trusts. So it is now this fabulous nature reserve. But what they've done in one place, I was standing in front of it, they've done a carve out of the side of the rock, because of course they've got this big hot pit anyway, haven't they, filled with water. But this one bit you can access is a complete cross-section of the geology of that part of the world. So the Chiltern Hills, you've got chalk, you've got sludge, you've got clay, and it shows all the strata, all the different levels. I mean, I did geography and geology and so on, all part of my environmental science degree. I love stuff like that. But you can stand there and you've got the grass and the wildflowers at the top, and then you've got the subsoil, and then the gravelly bit, and then they've got a little diagram that tells you what each layers are and how old they are. And then you could think about, wow, okay, so if that's me, what are all my layers? What's been laid down over time to shape who I am? What's, what affects me? What sometimes comes up to the surface from a very long time ago and affects how I respond? It's just such a useful tool to think about it in, with something that's naturally occurred over years, and you just think of your own self. And I think what I've noticed is the more that I'm experiencing new things, the more I notice that my clients are seeing the world differently, actually it starts to affect those around them. It starts to sort of, I kick myself for not finding the reference for this, but there was a study I read, and I've lost it, where there's something like, when you work on yourself, it impacts 8 people around you as well. And if you can get hold of that, it will be my best friend. Send it to me. But it's just so true. And it also makes sense, doesn't it? Because you think about, the systems approach. Of course, you treating yourself with compassion, people will notice that and start to think, well, actually, maybe I might treat myself with compassion too. So I think it's quite an important thing to embrace as coaches, but also as leaders. I had one client actually who her company was paying for the coaching, and she said, I feel really guilty that I'm getting this one-to-one work with you and my team aren't getting anything. I feel selfish that I'm the only one getting any support at this time. And I said to her, but actually it's not just you you're helping in this, you're helping everybody. And for her, I think particularly when somebody's of a in service of others type of way of being, it's quite a helpful framing as well, that you're doing it to be in service of the system.
There is some really great examples you're bringing here, and some really very visual examples. And I think our listeners, especially with the rock and the strata and the different levels, I'm similar to you. I love seeing things like that. I love finding fossils and seeing the rock work, and the stones that are around here up in Scotland. Every time you find a stone, you can see layers of the life that stone had had and how it's been formed, or the rocks and everything. So, and I think you're absolutely right. Helping people to kind of see the world in a different way, and actually utilizing that natural formed structure, and realizing we all have layers, and back from right when we were first born, what do our layers look like? How thick are they? How soft are they? How strong are they? What impact do they have on the layers above and below? And it's a really great visual, I think, for people to really kind of start to link themselves again with that systems approach. What's our system, and how has our system been created and informed by other systems as well? So some really great examples there. And I know Tring Park as well, so it's great for me as well. I can kind of visualize. I don't know the actual rock you're talking about, but I know the big pond. And I think as well, it also helps us to realize, we like you said, we created that blot on the landscape as human beings to start with, but then we've almost, like you said, rewild it and put it back to a natural state, and it's in a lovely nature reserve. So we can do good things as well, even though we probably have done something bad to start with.
Yeah.
But again, it just gives people that understanding, doesn't it, that nature can come back to life, and can come back to a really nice balance if we give it the opportunity to, rather than kind of taking it away. It kind of takes us now into the next sort of area of our podcast today, which is, you mentioned a little bit there about working with people, remotely. You mentioned Moscow and other locations as well. And now, you may take your coaching practice outdoors with those people, but I'm guessing a number of those calls and those kind of meetings are done indoors using Zoom and that sort of thing. But I know you also love your wildlife. You can see it behind me. I've got succulents and cacti growing out of the top of my head. And they're all over my house. And I know you yourself as well absolutely love to fill your house with nature as well. How do you work with your clients in terms of bringing the outdoors indoors when you need to, either in terms of actual physical nature, nature as in plants and stuff, but also in a metaphorical sense, in terms of actually using metaphors about nature when you're indoors, when you're having to be indoors? How do you bring the outdoors indoors in your practice?
Yeah, there's quite a number of ways, because I have clients. Necessarily there's limits to how far I'm willing to travel, for my work, because I'm trying as best as I can to avoid too much driving, too much traveling if possible, so the impact in the environment is minimized. But actually, practically speaking, it's not necessarily possible to sort of have as many clients in a day as you might virtually. there's just so many ways that you can bring the outdoors into a session, but also they can bring nature into their lives. And so I think I'm a big sort of big fan of the book No Boundaries by Ken Wilber, and I just love the way that it challenges you to think about actually what your assumptions are around the boundaries of what you're doing. And you know, when I'm working with clients, the metaphor I used earlier around the rushing river and the meandering stream is an example. There's also actually, I might bring a client a packet of seeds that I've gathered and encourage them to take it outside and, you know, scatter the seeds on some derelict land. So my latest thing, hollyhock seeds are being given out to all the people I'm seeing at the moment, and strict instructions not to go to wild spaces and scatter them, but to scatter them around, you know, derelict sites, wasteland, scruffy areas around your town centre. And think about it as, you know, sowing some ideas about what you want to do for the future. And, you know, a lot of clients I work with are wanting to explore what to do in the future. They're not quite sure. They know that what they're doing now isn't enriching for them, but they're not really sure what it is. So what a great sort of way of framing the seeding of ideas, and then almost forgetting about them, and then come next summer, there'll be all these, well, there may or may not be, because that's the wonderful thing, because you might scatter sort of 100 seeds and only 5 take, but you'll see this beautiful sort of 7-foot flower form. And, you know, I think those sort of things are quite important. Inviting someone to go and gather acorns and plant an acorn and watch it grow, and, you know, reflect on what that means for the impact, you know, the footsteps that you're going to leave in the sand for the future generations. What's the impact you want in your professional or personal life to be left? You know, I think impact is really important to people. I really noticed that shift. More and more people just want to have purpose. They want to have impact. So connecting them with something that has real longevity, something that's going to outlive them, is a really wonderful symbol of that. But I mean, houseplants, yes, people get houseplants too when I see them. I have something like, I don't know, my daughter's counted 200 and something houseplants, but actually mostly tropical, because I was brought up in the tropics. I love tropical plants. But that's my environment. That's where I flourish, where I feel enriched. Actually think about each person that you're working with. What is it for them? What's their environment? What do they connect with? And Alec, you talked about your cacti. You know, we resonate with different things, don't we? So what context, what ecosystem do we most flourish in? And actually then how can we nurture the soil that allows something to grow and flourish? And actually, you know, spending time doing real noticing and real sort of questions about how might that be relevant to me can make quite a big difference, I think, in someone's reflective practice beyond the coaching sessions. And I think for me it's quite an important part of my practice.
Just before we move on, Anna, I was going to say, the one thing I love about things like succulents and cacti is I've got some cacti that I've grown from seed, and I planted them back in 2016, and they're still only about this big, and they grow like millimetre a year or something ridiculous like that. But there's something about that. They don't grow quickly and die quickly. They take time, and and you can just ignore them. You leave them, they're there, they exist, they're wonderful things. And then every now and then one of them will just pop a flower. And you don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know why it suddenly happened to that cacti at that time. And then they might not flower again for, I don't know, 20 years, who knows. But you're absolutely right. I think you're right. It's what resonates with each individual, isn't it? And it's what makes you feel like you're having that kind of impact, as you said, on the environment. You're nurturing something, whether it's something that grows quickly or something that grows slowly. You're taking that time, you're putting your energy into it, and you're seeing nature come to life because of, you know, you sort of having that impact. So I think it just reminded me of those tiny little cacti that I'm growing, that one day will be huge, but you know, 50, 60, 70 years from now, when I'm long gone probably, but you know, they're only so tiny now, and they've been grown from seed, and it does make a big impact. Yeah, definitely.
And that invitation that is extended to your clients to take the hollyhock seeds and to scatter them, I think I've never heard excuse me, another coach extend that invitation. And just for anyone who's listening and watching who maybe doesn't know what a hollyhock looks like, I definitely kind of recommend you just to kind of Google it and see these absolutely gorgeous kind of bell-shaped flowers that could be anything from whites and pinks and purples. And they, yeah, I mean, they're taller than me, but I'm only 5 foot nothing. So that's not hard. And it's this kind of this bringing it back, and this kind of nurturing of ourselves, and how can we be in service to each other is so important. And yeah, the story that you shared about, you know, this manager having the one-on-one coaching and the guilt that they felt towards that, it is definitely something that can be raised. So it's a great kind of reframe, and I'm sure that was of great use to them. And just starting to kind of wrap up, and just any resources that you would love to signpost for our listeners. I know that you've mentioned one book, The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter, and his name I always pronounce completely wrong, Woolabin. But anything else that you would recommend if anyone is really keen to kind of develop their knowledge within this area? And then also, where could our listeners find you? I'm sure that there'll be people wanting to kind of follow up and learn more. So it'd be great to kind of signpost any website or social media links that you may have. And clearly we'll pop them into the website post as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, I very much recommend one of your previous guests, Leslie Roberts' courses. I did her course a couple of years ago, and it was wonderful. So highly recommend sort of Nature as a Co-Facilitator, or there's also an introduction to course, but she has a number of other things she does wonderful. And wow, there's quite a few books actually. I think The Well-Gardened Mind by Sue Stuart-Smith is absolutely wonderful. She magnificently weaves in history and poetry and nature and psychology and gardens, and for me that's just heaven. But she does it in such a way that really reminds you of how connected we are as human beings to nature, and how much, you know, there's so much science in there. I feel as a book, it's one of those things that undersells and over delivers. So totally recommend it. It's a marvelous book. You will read it cover to cover. I think The Good Ancestor is a really good, great book. I recommended it recently actually to a client I was working with remotely in Scotland to think about. He was talking about the strategy for his family business. And, you know, for a family business, it's about the future generations, isn't it? Because you want to continue to have this business. You know, you've got all the predecessors that have come before you, and all the people that have gone beyond, all of whom have planted oak trees of some sort or another, metaphorically, for the business. And so you're thinking much more deeply about longevity and impact than the much more sort of short-term perspective many organizations have. And so that book is marvelous. Just as a small foray into it, I recommend Everyday Nature to clients, which gives you sort of one little thing to notice in nature a day. And so even if you just do one a day, it's really nice practice. There's quite a few other books. I think I mentioned Ken Wilber's No Boundaries as well. I would actually encourage people also to use the form of questions that you ask your interviewees to go out and think about what kind of coach do they want to be. You know, if people are thinking about coaching in nature or taking it further, actually go through that sort of line of actually where did I begin? You know, the deep time walk, have you heard of that? Where they walk 4.6 kilometers to represent the 4.6 billion years that the Earth has existed. Actually, if you take those questions and do it as a time walk, is quite an interesting thing to do, and might help them arrive at how they do. You know, I think you have to show up truly as yourself when you work in nature. You cannot be somebody else. You might respect and value somebody else's approach, but you can actually only be you. So yes, how to contact me? LinkedIn. My website is shoyacoaching.com, and I'm on Twitter, all the various things, but LinkedIn actually is usually the best way to contact me. And I'd love to hear from people. Actually, I really love that this podcast is connecting people from all over the world who have similar interests and similar ways of seeing the world, but actually completely different ways of seeing the world as well.
And that is why one of the main reasons why we created the podcast in the first place, selfishly we wanted to expand our own network, and we wanted to help others expand their network. And I think, you know, we try to get lots of international coaches on, and you know, we've even introduced coaches in other countries to each other through the podcast, and then they're now walking together and supporting each other and working together across. We've got people working together across other countries. So I think that's one of the really great things. It is a system, isn't it? It's a system that's creating itself and constantly expanding and things. And I love what you mentioned there about, you know, asking your clients to really think about what their connection is with nature. So it's one of the things that Anna Marie and I talk about a lot, and we talked about when we first started the podcast, and obviously talk to our guests about, is really understanding what your own connection to nature is. What's your love for nature? Where does it come from? How is it different to others? How is it the same? And, you know, how, especially as coaches, how we maybe need to sometimes hold back a little bit on our own love for the nature, because we might have a client who hasn't got quite that much love for nature as us just yet. And sometimes, you know, we kind of need to take a little step back so that we're not front and center in that relationship, and they're building their connections and building their systems, and with us, as you said, nurturing and enabling and facilitating that. And thank you for the shout out for Leslie's training sessions. She's done some great work in that space and is award winning for it, EMCC award winning for it as well. And yes, it was a lovely podcast we had. So I would always recommend to anybody who, if you haven't listened to Leslie's podcast yet, go and listen to that one as well, because there's some great stuff in there about being, you know, nature as a co-facilitator. And Anna, thank you so much for your time today. You've given us some really great stories, some really great examples, things that I think people will be able to take away and just use themselves, you know, in their own minds, just thinking about the nature around them, and how they experience nature as they go on their walks. You've introduced me to the idea of giving some seeds to my clients, which I love the idea of. Anna Marie and I, we plant trees at the end of our coaching relationships, but giving seeds to clients as well, I think, is another touch, which is a little bit different as well, and obviously done in the right way with the right seeds. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and all your experience that you've shared with us today. And for our listeners, all of our previous podcasts are on our website, www.coaching-outdoors.com. So if you'd like to listen to any of the other previous podcasts, please find them there, or join our LinkedIn group, which is the Coaching Outdoors podcast. And for today, thank you so much, Anna. And we will no doubt, hopefully I'll see you at Henley. I'm back in Henley at the end of the year, actually doing my supervision course. So I'll no doubt see you around the campus, which would be great. And if I do, we'll definitely go for a walk in nature along the waterfront, hopefully. But thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, absolute pleasure. And I really hope we get to do a walk sometime.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard,
Like it,
Share across your network.
And subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks so much in advance for your support.